28,000 steam locomotives are catalogued here, by number, class and technical specification, by when they were built, for whom and for where. The archives of the North British Locomotive Company and its predecessors, housed today in the Mitchell Library in Glasgow, are a joy for the enthusiast, a job for the historian, and a questioning testament to human energy. The 150-year industry that the archives document has disappeared.
This is one of the diamond plates which was affixed to the locomotives by the North British Locomotive Company. Now, while some of the plates were round and in the earlier constituent companies they were of different shapes, the diamonds were the only ones which lasted from their inception in 1862 up until the closure of the company in 1962. This particular one is number 26514, and I'm just going to find out exactly what that one's from. It's from a batch of 100 locomotives which were ordered for the India Store Department in 1948. Watch numbers 26415, 26514.
There was a time when it seemed that the diamonds were forever and for everywhere. When Glasgow was the second city of the empire, when the Clyde was the way from the workshop to the world, when where the oceans and their great ships ended, their railways and their steam locomotives began. There was a time when the future was another country waiting to be opened and linked by steam. Today, that future has become a heritage. The giant crane at Finnieston Dock is a monument. The yardsticks that measure the confidence of post-industrial Glasgow are the skills and sweat of its past. Walter Nielsen, Glasgow engineer and entrepreneur, kept a diary to which in 1852 he confided land engines, high-pressure condensing engines, double-cylinder engines, marine engines, sugar-making mills, mining, gas and water machinery. I could do no good in continuing to take orders for such a variety of works. I made up my mind that I must confine myself to some speciality, and the choice seemed to be between marine or locomotive work. The choice was locomotives. And from the start, locomotives for export as well as the home market. Locomotives for the New World, for Canada, Cuba and the South American continent. Locomotives for New Zealand to join that other Scottish export, people. Locomotives for Africa, where, with the discovery of diamonds of the literal sort at Kimberley in 1871, Europe ran riot in its haste to exploit. Nielsen's works manager and partner was a German, Henry Dubs. Dubs left Nielsen in 1863 to set up his own steam locomotive company. His replacement was James Reed, a Scot who had trained in Manchester. Reed also broke with Nielsen to build his own locomotives. By the end of the 19th century, Nielsen, Dubs and Reed, the pioneers of Glasgow steam, were all dead. But they left behind them expertise and confidence. The companies they had created were the biggest in their field in Britain. A controversial but successful policy first introduced by Dubs was the employment of women as tracers in the design departments. The women worked in individual cubicles for the protection of their morals and to discourage chattering. In 1903, the three rival companies amalgamated to become the Springburn-based North British Locomotive Company, the biggest manufacturer of railway engines in Europe, with a workforce of 7,500 and a production capability of 600 locomotives a year. Over the next 60 years, 18,000 locomotives, 2 out of every 3 built, were exported. manoeuvred through the streets of Glasgow to the gateways of the Clyde. It had been that way from the beginning, with many engines specially designed for special tasks and extremes of climate and condition. This for the mountainous terrain of Cuba. This with spiked wheels and sleigh-like runners for the ice and snow of the Russian north. Built by Dubs and exported to China, the Flying Victory was to encounter unexpected obstacles. Bound coolies were flung across the railway in its path. Their masters were fearful that its noise and smoke might rouse the sleeping spirit dragons of the countryside. But soon the Chinese were coming to Glasgow themselves, the better to understand the methods and mysteries of steam. And with the Chinese, the world, as every continent was gripped by the power of steam in the service of the power of capital. Heads of state, military and commercial leaders, potentates, princelings and puppets, all beat a path to Springburn. For the workers of Springburn, it was a living, a hard one, presided over by hard management and harder foremen. The patina of the romance of steam had yet to settle over the product of their labours. And yet, they must have watched these foreign dignitaries posing for their photographs beside their gleaming acquisitions and snorted with a certain bitter pride. Locomotives for Egypt, locomotives for Malaya. Locomotives for the Orient, where the formal writ of the British Empire meant less than the handshake deals between rapacious despots and equally rapacious British businessmen. Locomotives for South America, a continent destroyed by neocolonialism generations before the term was invented. All grist to the Springburn mills. All bread in the mouths of Glasgow workers and their families. Locomotives for India, a society and culture with which Britain's special relationship was a special licence to pillage. Locomotives for the Middle East, and a visit to Springburn by a well-known blower-up of railways, Lawrence of Arabia. Locomotives for an Africa that in the name of civilization Europe was slicing up like butcher meat. The knife blades were the railways. It didn't, or it couldn't last. In 1962, after years of slow, then desperate decline, the North British Locomotive Company went out of business. It was to be another 25 years until, in the spring of 1987, another very different locomotive was hauled through the streets of Glasgow to the crane at Finnieston Dock. The straw locomotive, made by George Wiley, sculptor.
Just the idea of straw, the juxtaposition, just of straw, the lightness and the seemingly impermanence of straw against the weight and the sturdiness and the lasting quality of a locomotive. That juxtaposition appealed to me. And yet, stop and think, the locomotive has gone, the locomotives have gone, but you can still lay your hands on straw. So there's a little kind of philosophical point to be considered, just arising from the use of straw. There's a savagery about the loss of a complete industry to a very, very hard-working and respected group of people in Glasgow. And I wanted to end up with some sort of punch, but not, I didn't want a feeling of hopelessness. So we set it on fire in the end. We took it back to the floor of the assembly shop in Springburn and ceremoniously set it fire, which had all the adventure and carnival of a bonfire. But there was more to it than that. There was, in a way to say in Glasgow, there wasn't a dry eye in the house, you know. In the morning, when it had burnt itself out, or as the flames went down late at night, you could see inside it a question mark, which is my kind of sculptural symbol, the question mark. Always ask the questions. Why did locomotive building disappear from Springburn? Why?
The sculptor's question would be answered differently by different disciplines. History would say that the high noon of Springburn's day was already past when the North British Locomotive Company was formed. It never produced to its 600 engine a year capacity. International competition became steadily fiercer. The world was learning from Glasgow, and the world was finite after all. The economic downturns of the 20th century were scarcely compensated for by the demands of 2 world wars. Inflexible management bred an inflexible workforce. Failures of diversification, research and development, particularly in the field of diesel engines, were compounded after the Second World War by confused or absent transport policies for Britain, and by the advent of cars for the people. Investment could find bigger and quicker returns elsewhere. But, all that said, George Wiley's question of why remains.
We knew, we could feel it ourselves, the work was getting very scarce. And we were the first to know in the office, because usually our drawings were drawn long before they went near the works at all, you see, so that we felt it first.
That was Springburn's life. You took away all the locomotives and nothing left. And that's what's happened now. There are none.
To me, the fact was that you didn't appreciate what the beauty and the value of the steam engine was when you were there. What you were interested in was getting a job to make money, and it could have been anything you were making. Although there were attractions in it, and always have been, I've been interested in steam locomotives. But at that time, what you were there for was to get on with your work.
I felt that they didn't want to do away with steam, really. Their minds were on steam was the thing.
But later on, and looking back and tracing things, and realised the value that was in steam engines, that made a difference to me.
The time came round, my time was up. They sent for me, they said I finished at 65. And I was sitting in the office the day I was leaving. I got a wee presentation, and then we're sitting in there with different ones, clerk and things. And I said, you folk are all laughing in here. He says, God, I'm going away. So I said, just you wait, I says, in a wee while this place is going to close when I go away. Choking. And it was true.
Why, with that legacy of expertise and energy, did enterprise run out of steam? Did energy itself evaporate? Or did it change its chemistry?
We try to transmit the energy of investment, which is a rather faceless form of energy, usually ends up on the computer screen and in something that popped through the letterbox in an envelope with a window on it, and you look at it and you say, how boring. But nobody ever said that about a locomotive. I grew up with an old man, with my father, who was an engineer and who was the sort of fellow who, if you were going on a train journey, would take you up and introduce you to the engine driver. I think it's practically impossible not to love railway engines because they were all round about you, and we have this tremendous tradition of steam and engineering.
The love affair with the steam engine has only intensified with the passing of the industry. The thoroughbreds of Glasgow, Manchester, Swindon and Doncaster that have survived the knacker's yard are today the polished, pampered playthings of an age of celebration. In the 1830s, the Duke of Wellington predicted that the coming of railways would threaten the social fabric. Too much mobility for the masses would be a danger. From danger to diamond, from diamond to dinosaur, from dinosaur to diamond again. The steam locomotive has come full circle back in the mind of the enthusiast to the creations of Nielsen, Dubs and Reed, and to the vision of their great engineering ancestors, Stephenson, Trevithick and Watt. The fashions of the marketplace may change, its products come and go, but in the Shangri-La of heritage, perhaps the diamonds are forever. It was a great Victorian wanderer, Robert Louis Stevenson, who said that to travel hopefully is better than to arrive. In the Shangri-La of steam, the journey is always just beginning.
If you're handling materials, just the virtue of handling them, the human marks made on them, whether it's a Henry Moore scratch or a finger mark on one of his when he's been moulding the cast for the sculpture, or whether it's a weld mark when someone who's constructing something, that human content in it is essential for the energy contained in that work. And it seems to me as though Glasgow, the city of Glasgow and Springburn in particular, in effect were creating a sculpture. They were creating sculptures. They were certainly involved in a kind of social sculpture, not necessarily by design, but in fact they built these big warm-hearted locomotives, which were, everyone was a sculpture, a kinetic sculpture. They were colourful, they were good to look at, they had shape, form, mass, they had energy, and the energy it was contained in them was the energy of Springburn and Glasgow. And then a lovely thing happened. These locomotives were exhibited all over the world. They're still being exhibited, they're still there for everyone to see. They're still transmitting that same energy. And they're allowing other people elsewhere to transmit and to use their energies. It was almost, the whole idea of Springburn is really almost an artwork. And people in Springburn, whether they knew it or not, were behaving with an artistic attitude of mind, management workers alike, and transmitting this energy to all parts of the world.
Cuenta la leyenda que en un árbol se encontraba encantado diciendo un son guaraní. Es sobresaltado por
Rich in so much else, South America has little coal, and Paraguay, one of its poorest countries, none at all. Wood-burning locomotives, built at Springburn in 1911, are still in everyday scheduled service. The River Paraná, between Paraguay and Argentina, is only now, in the last years of the century, being bridged. Downstream, the Paraná is to be dammed, the valley flooded, and its villages with it. The bridge is a final redundancy notice, served both on the Glasgow-built ferry and on the Glasgow-built steam locomotives on the Paraguayan side of the river. But there's a lot of wood yet for the Springburn workhorses to burn. The Paraguayan people may well be said to be among the wretched of the earth politically and economically. Despite years of dictatorship and the best efforts of the engines themselves, the trains hardly ever run on time. But the romance of steam has another set of priorities, which makes the wood-burning locomotives of Paraguay a beacon in a technological time war worth travelling the world to see.
There's a crowd of us, 40 of us in number, who have come mainly from Great Britain, but also a few from Germany, fascinated by the railway we find here in Paraguay, which is quite unique. Wood-burning locomotives, no diesels, electrics they've never heard of, and it just is really quite a unique piece of operation in the world today, and of course famous for its Glasgow-built North British engines and other British and a few American-built locos, which are quite remarkable.
The 1988 Australian bicentennial celebrations were all about what had made a nation out of a continent. Railways and locomotives and the part they had played in the building of Australia were not forgotten. Jewel in the crown of a festival of steam was the city of Melbourne, a Glasgow diamond.
It's a team effort. And then similarly, of course, that unless the engine's turned out in fairly good mechanical condition, etc., well, it doesn't matter how good your crews are. If the engine's no good, well, the crew can't make it work either. So everything's a big team effort, right down from the people that drive it, the people that maintain it, and the people who even coal it or light it up. Even the littlest job around the place is part of the team. Actually, they were that much superior to anything else we had at the time, because I think the maximum range of our other passenger engine, which was the A2, was about 75 miles on the passenger train before it had to stop for water, whereas these particular locomotives could actually go about 120 miles before they needed to take water. So it actually extended the range of existing trains and also speeded up the timetables, because they didn't have to require to stop for take water during most of the trips, of course. When you actually see a steam locomotive, you can actually see it working there, because there's moving parts and you see the emphasis of power through the pistons and the rods. There's a lot of people interested in watching them because, they're a sight to see coming along.
We're very proud and honoured to have the Glasgow built loco at the head of the procession of locos that are here. The members of the group have put a lot of hard work into getting the loco to the condition it's in today.
Oh, it's a great engine. There was over 70 of them running in Victoria, and there's only 7 left.
The following week we had the trip up to Castlemaine Malden to ride on their K. At the finish of it they had the K160 and their 2 diesels at the head of this train. They did this marvellous photo run against the background of old bush cottages coming out of the gum trees. It looked beautiful.
Take away the steam engines and there's nothing left. That was Springburn's life.